last 20 miles of it through the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation, and that was over 20 years and no one could get an agreement, but during the short time I was transportation minister, I was able to make that agreement too. During my time on city council, when we were trying to negotiate an annexation with Rocky-View, it went on for years and years, and everybody said, you will never get a deal without going to court. I got on the negotiating committee, and a year and a half later, we had a handshake agreement. No court, no municipal government board. So those are kind of what I think are kind of important points in terms of how we deal with the economy and getting things to market and actually making common interest partnerships with people who are both our neighbors and our competitors and people that we care about, like the First Nations, who we're going to be neighbors with forever. So we better get good at it, the way I see it. So that's the other piece. The other piece is we can't do a lot of these things that we really need to do for Alberta without help from our federal government. And I want you to know that I have a very good relationship with our federal government because I've worked with them over the years, both as a volunteer and done other things. I know there's somebody else in this race that has experience there too, but I will say when the Prime Minister had his barbecue here a month and a half ago, there were media people that did remark that I got a louder clap than the other guy did at the thing. But you know what, and I don't say that to knock the other guy, because he has connections there too, but rather to drive home the point, if I'm able, that I also have a very good relationship and we'll be able to work with our federal government and have lots of friends there. It's kind of important for the future of our province, that's why I mention it. So those are some of the big things, and through that, through the economy, we will raise the money to build the roads, the schools, the hospitals, the social services that we need. Very important. And we need to do that. When we're doing that, when we're raising that money, when we're spending that money, we need to do it in a way that's respectful for our Albertans. In my opinion, we haven't been as respectful as we should be. When we're spending $43 billion, man, that's a lot of money every year. That money does not belong to your government. That money belongs to you. And when your government reports to you, your government should report it in a way that's easy for you to understand, even if you don't have an accounting degree. There's probably people in this room with an accounting degree, God bless you. But most of us 4.1 million Albertans don't have one, and it's our money too. And we should report it in such a way that it makes sense to you, and you can either agree with it or disagree with it, but certainly understand it, even without an accounting degree, and I'm committed to doing that should I become your premier. The other thing we need to do is talk to you about those things, is to get your permission, and the best way to do that is to start with doing financial reporting in such a way that Albertans understand it. And I think there's some lessons we can learn from Alberta families. Again, I don't have an accounting degree. I can understand my mortgage just fine, my bank statement just fine, and my credit card bill just fine. And I think we need to talk to Albertans in Alberta family terms. When Albertans, for example, if most of them are like me, they're addicted to sleeping indoors. So a lot of them, for example, take a mortgage out in their house. And what do? They say, honey, whether it's the other adult in the house, and say, what is our considerations is, well, can we afford the payments? How long will it be before we pay the house off? And what's left at the end of that? And I think that's the way we need to talk to Albertans. For example, and somewhere near the end of 2014, we should say to Albertans, we borrowed $4 or $5 billion this year. We built exactly these schools, exactly these hospitals, exactly these kilometers of roads, and then maybe we should do what families do. We should schedule a mortgage burning party. So if it's 20 years, 2034, if it's 25 years, 2039, we should be able to say to Albertans, now we've paid off that 2014 borrowing, and these schools we bought are still good for another 50 or 75 years. These hospitals we built are still good for another 50, 75 years. And the roads we built won't have to be rebuilt for another 10 or 20 years. That way Albertans will know they got a good deal and that everything was fine. And I think there's some lessons there we can learn from Alberta families. And as I close, I'm getting close, I'm going to address the elephant in the room that I'm going to get questions on. Trust is a big issue. Albertans are not happy because they don't feel they've been able to trust all the decisions that have gone on. And I would say to you, my best answer to that is the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And you might say, well, McIver, you just talked about bad past performance. But we are talking about the leadership, so I'm going to talk about my past performance. If you go on the website now, you can see my expenses. And they are, in a word, boring. Please go online on the government's website and look at them. They're boring. And my commitment to you, if you make me the premier, is I will insist that everybody in government's expense accounts are boring. Yes, you have to spend money. You have to travel. You don't have to fly first class. You don't have to stay at the very best hotel, and you don't have to eat at the most expensive restaurants. There's lots of choices where you can get treated with great dignity and comfort without breaking the bank with money that doesn't belong to you. And I would say it's the example that I already have set, and one I'll insist that everybody else follows, and I'll keep setting it. Along those lines, I've said that the staff in the Premier's office won't make more than the Premier. The public has been unhappy about political public servants in particular making too much money. And I will also say that that even where nobody notices, and you can check this too, on my constituency office that I have, I have an allowance for that, and every year I spend $10,000 to $20,000 less than I need to, and I could have spent it all without any complaints, but I don't, because I don't need to. You might agree with me, perhaps that's an attitude that we need to filter through all of government, and who's in a better position to filter that attitude than the person that's leading the government. So I want you to be my bosses. I want our government to treat you like your servants rather than your masters, and that's my commitment to you. And I could go on, but I'm probably at the end of my 10 minutes.
All right. Well, I think we got the juices going and looking forward. So here's the ground rules about Q&A. I want to get to everybody. So if you put your hand up, I'll acknowledge you. We do realize some questions require a little bit of foreplay, a little bit of background, but if it gets to about an hour, I may cut you off. So I want to make sure I get to everybody, so if you keep your background as brief as possible, again, I want to make sure we get all questions answered. Here we go. We'll start with Steve at the back.
Okay, quick background and then question. I've known Rick for about 18 years. One of my powerful memories of Rick when he was in City Council was I was giving a presentation on budget, and it was November, and I'd forgotten my coffee. And I was sitting in council chambers, and 10 minutes later, his assistant came up with an envelope, and I mentioned that. And I still mention it because it's a powerful memory that I have of Rick as a personal friend. But one of the questions I have, as a former police officer who's attended 60 fatalities, I can state unequivocally that speed is one of the primary factors in fatality investigations. Speed contributes to fatalities, period. And yet you come on record saying that you want to get rid of photo radar, or at least that allegation. And I want to say, what is the logic behind that? Are we just currying votes, or are we actually looking at public safety?
Well, make no mistake, everything I'm doing is currying votes. If you haven't noticed, there's a campaign going. Now to answer the rest of your question, I would say to you that the information you have, at least as you expressed it, doesn't seem to be 100% accurate. What I have said is I'll kill speed on green cameras, which is not, I didn't say I'd kill photo radar. The difference is, for those that know, photo radar is photo radar, it's going to stay the way it is. The speed on red light, there's other photo radars. Speed on green is a specific type of photo radar that I believe is more of a tax collection device than a safety device. Let me explain why, and thank you for the opportunity to explain why. A red light camera, what it does is if you go through a red light and you don't stop, it takes the picture of your license plate and sends you a big fat fine. I'm all for that. You know why? Because I think you should stop at red lights. I think you might think you should stop at red lights. The green speed on green camera is a specific device that if you go through a traffic signal when the light is green and you are speeding, it takes a picture and sends you a speeding ticket. And you say, and you might say, and I think Steve is saying, well, the guy or the lady is speeding, so why wouldn't you send him a ticket? And now I'm going to explain why I don't think in this case you should. Because what happens is, you actually don't need to look at your speedometer to know when your speed is at 0, right? If you're going to stop because you don't want the red light ticket, you can look at the roads and stop and hit the brakes. The difference is when you're going through a green light camera and the person beside you is expecting you to keep going, having you slam on the brakes might not be a good idea. You might get rear-ended. Personally, if they say, well, if you go through once and you get a ticket, you'll slow down. Will you? Maybe you will, but whether you slow down or not, once you do that, you know where your eyes are going through that intersection when there's a green, you're looking at your speedometer. Because unlike getting to 0 with the red light camera, getting from 60 to 50, you actually need to look at your speedometer. I don't want people looking at their speedometers when they're going through intersections, particularly when they're going through intersections fast. I want them looking for pedestrians that they need to miss. I want them looking for cyclists that they need to miss, and I want them looking for other vehicles that they need to miss. I believe it's a tax collection device and not a safety device for the reasons that I just said. Now, you're allowed to disagree, but that's my reasoning, and I stand by it.
Alex, and then to you.
As you travel the province, have you noticed that are there women who are feeling particularly peeved at the critique of Miss Redford that was never directed at previous premiers? And will this work to the benefit of Miss Smith?
You know, I've heard both, Alex. It's a great question, and I've heard a real. The question was, as I've traveled the province talking to Albertans, have I heard from women that are unhappy because Miss Redford was unfairly treated, and particularly when previous premiers had behavior at least as bad as hers? Is that
correct?
Okay.
And will this work to the benefit of Miss Smith?
And will that work into the benefit of the Well-Rose leader? And I would say to you, maybe. But let me put a little meat on those bones. I've heard both things. I've heard that people say that Allison was beat upon by the media and other people as hard as he was because she's a woman, and I'm sure that may be partially true and partially not. I'm not 100% sure. I've also heard from, frankly, a lot of women with kids that have said they're offended because Miss Redford, you know, former Premier Redford, took her daughter on the plane, and I've heard the particularly single women said, you know, I'm a single woman, or my husband works, and I have to run like crazy to get my kid out of daycare by 6 o'clock, or it's $1 a minute, and I'll be like 10 minutes late. They call social services. Why should my employee get that looked after when it doesn't get looked after for me? I've heard both arguments in fairness. So I've heard, frankly, women being the most offended, and I've also heard women being the most angry. So I'm not just sure how to answer your question, because I've heard both things. But what I will acknowledge is that previous premiers, with what Allison has been beaten up for, previous premiers did as a matter of course without any scrutiny or any punishment. But, and I don't know whether it's going to benefit the opposition or not. It will if we don't change our habits, because the world has changed. Whether it's unfair or not, the world has changed. Because most people in the room, like me, have something like this in their pocket that doubles as a camera and a video camera. And the media loves to take clips off of that, and particularly when someone who has some notoriety is on it and use it. So we have to adjust our behavior to the day. I intend to, and I intend to insist everybody else does, even if it's not fair, because our bosses demand it.
Thank you. All right, Miles and Gabor.
Okay, I'll state as one of the bosses, I'll state one of my motions, a fictitious motion. Would you support me, Rick, if I made a move that handing out of memberships be banned? And now I'd like to have a little preamble. I've appreciated Rick ever since he's worked for me as an alderman. One of the characteristics is he does walk the talk about him being servant to me, that I'm his boss. And the point towards that is that if he's at a doorstep, he will talk with an individual until that person is run out of questions. He just continues to work with an individual to answer their questions, no matter who he is or she is. And secondly, he'll never say anything disparaging about another person. So therefore, my motion is strictly that. Would you second my motion that handing out pre-memberships be banned?
Well, okay. Miles and I are friends, that's clear, and I hope I live up to the high praise you just gave me. I try never to say anything bad about anybody else. I'm not sure I'm 100% on that, but I ought to be 100% on that. I'll acknowledge that, and where I fall short, you're allowed to call me up and tell me to smarten up. But you know what? I don't believe that our party should give out memberships or allow it. Certainly, spouses buy memberships for their spouses and for their kids, and employees buy memberships for their employees, and employers sometimes buy memberships for employees. But I don't think our party and campaigns within our party should be doing that. Frankly, I think it devalues what we're doing, and tend to regulate the party ask them for a rule change on that.
All right, thank you. Gab or then,